What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen, and I am back with another true crime video. And if you can't tell, I am very ill right now. I don't think there's enough throat coat tea in the world to save my voice at this point, and so I am genuinely just hoping and crossing my fingers it will stick out through the rest of this video because I've already missed a few videos for you guys. I have been really wanting to get this particular video out there, so I finally got fed up enough that I'm just sitting down and I'm filming it. So hang in there with me. We'll get through this. So today we're going to be speaking about another more recent case, and this is the suspicious death, I'm not quite sure how to label it, of 19-year-old Derontae Martin. And this occurred back in April of 2021. And I'm honestly shocked that there's not been a lot more coverage on this case. And this is just one of those cases where everyone needs to know about it because something is very wrong here. And I feel like a lot of people are not taking accountability, and the investigating agencies are hoping to kind of sweep this under the rug. So, 19-year-old Derontae Martin was found dead from a gunshot wound to his head in the attic of this man's home. He was allegedly there for a party. No one's even really sure if he was supposed to be there or how he ended up there. And ultimately, it was determined to be self-inflicted. And immediately no one believed that was the case, from the community to local activists to his family. So lots of questions were asked, and eventually there was a jury put together to look into the cause of death. There was a coroner's inquest, it's called, and ultimately they determined that this was not, in fact, a self-inflicted death, but instead death by violence. And despite the fact that this was concluded by this jury panel of 6 individuals, from my understanding, the case was closed anyways, remained how it was, a self-inflicted death, and everyone tried to move on from it. So before I get into the nitty-gritty details of this case, I do want to first thank Audible for partnering with me on today's video. Companies like Audible that have supported my channel for a very long time allow me to do what I do and help out these families as much as I possibly can, and so I really appreciate working with them. But for those of you who are not aware of what Audible is, they are the leading provider for spoken word entertainment, and honestly, the most convenient and enjoyable way to consume all sorts of your favorite kinds of content. Whether you love audiobooks or Audible originals or podcasts, all of it is in one place for you to be able to enjoy. And there's an absolutely massive selection across different genres, things like true crime, autobiography, science fiction, motivation. So there's an adventure for absolutely everyone. And one of the best parts about it is that Audible members get a lot of really great perks. So members get to choose one title a month to keep from the entire catalog, including bestsellers and new releases. And Audible members also get access to a growing selection of titles that are simply included. And this has been like one of my all-time favorite things. It's like a treasure trove. It's been a fun way for me to check out new formats or genres that I typically would not gravitate towards. And I found a few of my favorites hiding in that selection. And I actually recently just started an audiobook that has caught my attention and I keep going back to and looking at for probably a few months now. And it's a thriller called The Quarry Girls by Jess Laurie, I think is how you pronounce her last name. The audiobook essentially follows a group of teenagers through their summer adventures, so something that should be like innocent and fun and exciting, except they end up witnessing something absolutely awful and they make a pact to never tell anyone what they saw until one of their friends ends up vanishing into thin air and they start to wonder if the two things are connected. So if you guys want to check out The Quarry Girls or just explore what Audible has to offer to help you be inspired or entertained, new members can try Audible for free for 30 days. All you have to do is visit audible.com/Danielle or text Danielle to 500-500. So now on to the details of the death of 19-year-old Derontae Martin. So in this particular case, there is not a lot that is known, and I just want to set a huge preface before I get into any of this. A lot of this information is information that has come straight from Derontae's family. There's a lot of it that is pure rumor. I will obviously let you guys know what is what, because investigating agencies have not handed over essentially any information to anyone. And I think the only reason there's any information in articles out there is because there was a coroner's inquest, a grand jury was convened, and so some information did get into the hands of journalists. So Derontae spent the earlier part of his childhood living in St. Louis, Missouri. He was the oldest of 7 children. I believe that his mother, Erica Lotz, was a single mother and was doing everything that she could to make ends meet. And around the time he was 10 years old, they decided to move from St. Louis, Missouri to about, I believe, 90 miles south to a smaller area of Park Hills, Missouri. Now, St. Louis is absolutely massive. There's a lot going on there, a lot of people, and Park Hills was very, very different. Park Hills has a population of only about 3,500 people to 4,000 people. It's a very tight-knit community, and the demographics are also vastly different. According to a few of the different statistics that I have looked up, 95% of the population is white. And as you guys know, there was also a lot going on during this time frame in Ferguson, and there was just a lot happening here, and this particular area is also known to harbor a lot of very extremist, white supremacists, like that sort of thinking. Actually, this was the home of a very prominent KKK member. He actually was shot and killed in 2017, but just to kind of show you about this area, this is where a lot of protests were going on at the time. At the same time, there's anti-protesters coming and throwing nooses out. Like, it was a very tricky social situation at the time that this murder occurred. But this is also where Derontae grew up. This is where he went to middle school. This is where he went to high school. And this is where all of his friends are. Now, he was incredibly popular. He was apparently hilarious. He always had a smile on his face. He could make sure that anyone around him could laugh. His mom said that he was, quote, just a big kid. I told him all the time he was 19, but inside he was about 12. Anyone who spoke about Derontae since his death said that you never saw Derontae without a smile on his face. He cared about absolutely everyone around him. He was very hardworking. He was a good student. He was a great teammate, because a lot of his life in the years prior to his death revolved around football. He loved to play football, and he actually had dreams of eventually ending up in the NFL. Now, he had spent his freshman year of high school attending an alternative school. He was not having behavioral issues. It was nothing along those lines. He was a great kid. He was just struggling with his attendance. And so they sent him to this alternative school, and he ended up being approached, I believe, by a man named Corey Schweiss, who was from Park Hills Central High School. And he was the, I believe, coach of the football team. Derontae was a big kid, you guys. He was like 6'3", 250 pounds, and he had a lot of potential as a football player. So basically, the coach from Central High School said, hey, look, you need to get your grades up, you need to get your attendance up, and once you do that, you can transfer to Central High School, and we can hopefully work out something with you to be on the team. And when Derontae put his mind to something, he was capable of anything, and so that is exactly what he did. He got up his attendance, his grades. So by his sophomore year, he moved from the alternative high school to Park Hills Central. And that year, he slowly started working with the football team, and by his junior year, he was officially on the team. He was a defensive lineman, and he played his junior and senior year. His cousin also played on the team and spoke in interviews since his death about how important the football team was for not just him, but also Derontae.
He was really good. He played defensive line for us.
And Derontae Martin loved his team.
He's always happy and good. The kids are always putting smiles on the kids' face. That's what I remember most of. He had some really good buddies on the team.
Derontae's cousin, Isaiah Johnson, was one of them.
He was great. He was aggressive. He was very athletic for his size. I mean, he could do a lot of things that other big boys like him couldn't do.
Derontae.
He said, quote, when we were kids, we used to live in the same trailer park together, and he lived right in front of me, so our windows were facing each other. And when our parents fell asleep, we'd go to the windows and open up the curtains and look at each other and sneak out of the house and do whatever we wanted to do because we were bad kids. Football definitely changed us. The coaches and stuff like that just helping us through this life because we didn't have it easy growing up. And so this was like Derontae's life. This was something that had totally changed changed things for him and opened up a lot of different opportunities, and he was thriving in this environment. And he ended up, according to his family, being offered a scholarship to an out-of-state college for football. And this was incredibly exciting for him, except he did not have the greatest SAT scores. And basically, he was told, look, this option's still going to be on the table. You just need to get these SAT scores up so that you can attend. And so that was kind of his plan after graduating. He was going to work on his scores and eventually live out his dream, do college football, hopefully maybe make it to the NFL. He was very dedicated to all of this. He also didn't just want to sit stagnant while not attending school, so he ended up getting not one but two jobs. He worked at a local Walmart and a local restaurant, but unfortunately, when all of this was occurring, along comes the pandemic and ended up taking both of his jobs away from him. So while that was definitely a blow, he was still pushing forward. And around this time, like I think just weeks prior to his death, his family decided to move away from Park Hills back towards St. Louis, Missouri, and they actually moved to Ferguson. This was another huge positive thing in his life. This was a massive accomplishment for his mom. She was able to purchase this house, and for the first time ever, Derontae was going to have his own bedroom. His entire life he had shared a room with a sibling, and he finally was having his own space. And his mom said that he was so excited that he was FaceTiming his friends before he even had furniture in the room and was like, hey, look at what I have, look at my space. He was just beyond excited. I'm sure this felt like a very validating moment for him, you know, when he's not able to go to college or move out on his own. This is at least something that makes him feel more adult now that he has graduated from high school. And on top of that, his mom was able to purchase him a ton of new clothes, a flat screen TV, new shoes, all these things. And so this was a big moment in their lives, which is very important considering the fact that it was pretty much immediately determined that his death was self-inflicted. So shortly after moving, Derontae somehow ended up breaking his dominant hand, his right hand. And so on April 22nd, which was a Thursday, this is like 2 days prior to his death, he ended up having to go in for surgery. He broke it bad enough that he needed a few pins in his hand, and then he had a cast that was going from all the way at his fingertips up to his elbow. So his right arm totally out of commission. And according to his family, he was not ever one to enjoy taking medicine, especially prescribed medicine like that. And he actually refused to take the pain medicine that they gave him, which again will come into play later on. And then going into the weekend, despite having just had surgery, he had some pretty big plans. So Derontae was planning on being picked up by a couple of friends and going back to Park Hills to stay for the weekend. According to interviews with his grandmother, there was an individual, a friend of his, that had recently gotten out of jail, and this friend will also tie in later on. And he wanted to go and visit this friend of his, and also his grandmother was still living back in Park Hills, so the plan was to go visit this friend and then go spend time with his grandmother. Now, around this time, keep in mind that all of Derontae's really close friends from his time in football, like his whole time at Central, they all had gone on to play football at universities or had gone off to community colleges. And so he was really only left with friends from his alternative high school. And the reality of the matter is that kids that attend these alternative high schools typically have either situations like Derontae where they're just struggling with, absences or their grades, but there's also kids that have some serious behavioral issues that attend these schools and involve themselves in some very questionable behavior. And so unfortunately, this is apparently the group of people he had been hanging out with. His coach has gone on to be interviewed and even mentions the fact that prior to coming to Central, Derontae had surrounded himself with people that were not necessarily the greatest people to be around. And so that may come into play when it comes to what happened to Derontae. So I believe that Friday, the 23rd, Derontae was picked up by friends. By Saturday, April 24th, Derontae's grandmother and mother had not heard from him. And this wasn't anything that seemed to be too odd. He was 19 years old. He had a life of his own. He would go and do things on his own during the weekend. But he still usually was good at maintaining contact with his family, especially because he was supposed to be going to see his grandmother. But there was nothing too worrying yet until Sunday, April 25th. At this point, they still could not reach Derontae. He had not reached out to them. They had spent Saturday calling him. They were calling him this Sunday, and there was just nothing. And this was getting concerning because I believe he was supposed to be back like by that Monday, just that following week at some point. He still had yet to go to his grandmother's house. And his mom also, I believe, was supposed to send him money or something and couldn't even get in contact with him to get him this money, which is something you probably would have been excited about getting. And so apparently while they're having this conversation on the phone about being concerned about Derontae's grandmother gets a phone call from another family member. And this family member says, "Hey, do you know where Derontae is?" And when she's like, "Look, we're trying to figure that out too," the family member that called said, "Well, I want to let you know that my son got a phone call from someone saying that Derontae has been shot." And so this sent both Derontae's grandmother and mother into an absolute frenzy. They immediately called to the nearest hospital, and Park Hills, from my understanding, is in St. Francis County. And they're calling this hospital and they're like, "We've got no record of a gunshot victim coming in here. There's nothing." And so they're like, where on earth could he be? So they eventually end up calling 911 and saying, "Look, we have heard rumors that our 19-year-old grandson / son has been shot and we cannot locate him. Will you help us?" And ultimately, this dispatcher says, "I'm going to look things up real quick," and says, "Yes, I can confirm he's been shot, but this didn't occur here in St. Francis County. It actually occurred in neighboring Madison County," which was kind of odd because this wasn't a location that Derontae would have gone. I don't think he had any ties there really whatsoever. Madison County ends up confirming to Derontae's mother and grandmother that Derontae had in fact been shot, that past Saturday night, so not Saturday night the 24th, but into the 25th, that Sunday, at 3:01 a.m., they had received a 911 phone call from a man reporting that Derontae had shot himself. And they confirmed that he was no longer alive. And so this is how Derontae's family learned about his death. They were not reached out to by law enforcement, by the coroner, by anyone. They had to hear it from other family members and call around until they managed to get the right person on the phone. Now, the next few days were just absolute chaos for Derontae's family because they still were not reached out to by anyone from Madison County, by any law enforcement entity whatsoever. And they were basically just speaking to the morgue, I believe, that ended up having Derontae there and could not get any answers. They're like, "Can we come and identify him? Like, how did you identify him? Why haven't you called us to alert us that he has now been brought in?" Because according to the family, at this point, Derontae had already been taken from the area in which he was found. He had already received an autopsy and he had already been embalmed. All of this done without the family being notified and without family's permission. And so they were given a bunch of different reasonings and excuses as to why and how all of this occurred. Unfortunately, they were repeatedly told by this funeral home that they were not able to come and see Derontae, that they could not come and identify him, that he'd already been identified. They were given a few different reasons as to why they couldn't go. They were told, "Oh, well, we're closed today. It's a Sunday." "Oh, well, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so you can't come here." And those are definitely valid things. I'm not saying that they're not, but there was never any alternative given to his family. It's not, "Okay, well, we can do this," or "How can we work with you to figure out how this happened?" It was all, "No, you can't do any of that. We can't tell you any of this." It was just brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. And then April 26th, that Monday, again, prior to speaking with the family still, the sheriff's department made a statement on their now deleted Facebook page that they believed this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. They essentially named the victim, Derontae Martin, briefly explained what they were doing and that he'd already had an autopsy and this, that, and the other, and that everything that they had up to this point suggested self-inflicted, and that the autopsy had already been preliminarily basically determined to be self-inflicted. And they did state that they were waiting on other things. My guess is they were waiting on the tox screen, because that's not going to come back within a day. You would also assume that they were possibly continuing some sort of investigation into this. But regardless, within like a little over 24 hours after Derontae's death, it was already being announced that this was something that he did to himself, and there was not a possibility that this was foul play. And keep in mind, family had still not been contacted by anybody. By April 27th, Erica, Derontae's mother, finally had to reach out herself to the Madison County Sheriff's Department and basically say, what on earth is going on? Nobody notified me of my son's death. I had to find out. I had to do all this research myself. I had to track him down. And now you're posting things to the Facebook page about the determination of what his cause of death was, and I'm still not getting any answers. Basically, she was trying to just understand what was happening. And according to what she has said, she was met with hostility. There seemed to be no sympathy whatsoever. She was not told anything at all about the case, about what happened, about where it happened, any details whatsoever, just that an autopsy had been conducted and that it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound that was fired at close range. It made it seem like an open and shut case. However, the entire community and Derontae's family did not believe that whatsoever. According to what is claimed by those at the party and what investigators have come forward and said, and the documents that have been released due to the coroner's inquest, essentially, for one reason or another, answers that have still not been given, Derontae somehow ended up going from the area in Park Hills where he planned to be all the way to the neighboring county of Madison County to a small town called Fredericktown. And he went to this area to attend the 18th birthday party of a girl named, it's either Lainey or Lonnie Wade. According to family, Derontae did not know pretty much anyone at this party. I have seen in a more recent interview that was done a couple of months ago with his mother. I have that linked down below. She did say that one of the guys that had picked him up was potentially living at this house at the time, but that was pretty much the only connection. This party was in a very remote part of Fredericktown, and the house was owned by a man named James Wade that is known for being racist. He has made multiple racist posts on social media, mainly in the form of memes. There is evidence of this posted on the website for Derontae that I have linked down below. I will not participate in spreading those memes myself. But it is like absolutely gut-wrenching, disgusting things that are said in these memes, all revolving around slavery and black men and women. And it's just really disturbing because Derontae was the only black male at the house at this time. He also has not one, but two Confederate flags proudly out on his property. And so a lot of people began to be concerned that potentially this could be a hate crime, that something else was happening here based on James Wade's history. And so this is one of the many reasons why a lot of people began to really push back on this conclusion that this was self-inflicted when there seemed to be no investigation into this whatsoever. And not just that, Derontae is not the only person that allegedly died from self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the head on this property, which I will get into that in a little bit. So anyways, Derontae's at this party, and I guess sometime around 3:01 a.m., James Wade himself was the one who called into 911. I do have a recording of that phone call. It is 4 minutes and 4 seconds long, so I will try to make sure I put the transcripts as it's being said because it's not very clear. There's clearly a lack of service in this area, so here we go.
Madison County 911, what's the address of your emergency?
Yes, I need the cops that And an ambulance? Yeah, apparently a guy just shot himself.
You said a guy just shot himself?
Yeah.
And that's at,
Yeah.
and is that where you are?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is he breathing at all?
Yeah. No.
Do you think he's beyond any help? Do you want to try CPR?
Somehow got in the back of my. They. Okay.
Okay, you're cutting out.
Hang on a second. Okay. I can't even get transferred. Hey.
Can you hear me?
See if he's breathing. Thank you, yes.
He is breathing?
He's gasping for air, they said.
How old is he, do you know?
How old is he, man? Maybe 20, 19, 20, 21, somewhere like that.
Shot at?
In the head.
In the head?
Or, you think, I can't really see him back there.
Is he alert at all? Is he conscious?
He don't look like it.
And when did this happen?
About 3 minutes ago.
You said 3 minutes ago?
You.
Okay, you're hard to hear again.
Anyway.
You're cutting out, sir. You're cutting out. I can't understand you.
Trying to find a spot where I can talk. Hello?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Right when I called you,
What was your name?
James Lee.
Can you hear me?
So, a lot of people began to point out how strange this 911 phone call was just because James Wade seemed incredibly calm during it all. And you do very clearly hear a handful of younger individuals in the background that seem to be in some sort of distress over what had happened. And on top of that, it didn't seem clear as to if Derontae was even still alive at this point or not, because at one point it said that he's clearly not alive, he's not breathing, and then at another time, it said that he's possibly gasping for air, but despite that, there seemed to be no desire or urgency to start performing something like CPR in an attempt to save Derontae's life. Shortly after this call was made, a responding officer came to the scene and was able to find Derontae up in the attic. Now, I've seen it described as him being in a closet within the attic. I cannot tell you for sure how exactly it was located. I just know that he was in a very small, difficult to get to area of the attic. It seems that authorities were there for a whopping 45-ish minutes, according to what has been stated. It doesn't appear there was any sort of large investigation that occurred that night. I don't know how many people were questioned that night. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, tons of rumors began to spread, lots of different speculation because of the circumstances. Derontae's family could not get a straight answer from anyone as to how he ended up at this house. Why on earth would he have wanted to end his life? The entire situation just seemed super strange because he had never been to this house before. He didn't know James Wade. He apparently knew of the girl who was having the 18th birthday party, but he didn't know her well, like by any means at all. My assumption is he just knew her from living in like the relative area and having like acquaintances that maybe mingled together. But it just seems strange that Derontae, who was in a fairly good position in life at the moment, would plan to go take a weekend to be with friends and his grandmother, somehow end up at a place that he was not supposed to go. And while at this place, somehow managed to get a hold of a gun, and then in a house he'd never been in before, then went on to find the attic, and in the middle of the night decided he was going to end his own life. This was not a pill that anyone was willing to swallow. I will say my typical spiel that I do, that you don't always know what's happening in someone's life. You don't know what's happening in someone's mind. Even family members, there's not always signs from a loved one. Your loved one's not always going to straight up tell you what's going on. They might not look depressed. They might not look like they have any ideations of ending their own life. But the truth is, you don't always know. Those things are not always obvious. So while there is always this chance that something may have been going on, maybe he was upset that he watched all of his friends go off to play football and live a dream that he was still working really hard to get towards. But given all of the other circumstances, I don't understand how you could come to that conclusion without looking deeper into things.
His family said he was hoping to play college ball. Now he'll never get the chance. Derontae was found dead in this home in Fredericktown last month with a gunshot wound to his head. Investigators initially ruled it a suicide. Those who knew him find it hard to believe.
You all right? There is no way Derontae committed suicide. There's just no way. I'm just not going to accept that.
Schweiss saw him just weeks ago and had a conversation that makes his loss that much more of a mystery.
He was happy. He was, the big old smile on his face. So, I asked him how everything was going. He said great. He was having a good time.
A couple of days after Derontae's death, the friends that had driven him to Park Hills and then ultimately to the house where he would allegedly end his life ended up bringing his phone back to his mom. And when this happened, there was just yet another red flag. She opened up his phone and it had been wiped. There were no more text messages. His call log had been deleted. His contacts had been deleted. There was absolutely nothing. So you can see how she believed that someone was possibly trying to hide something. On top of that, ultimately, the talk screen came back and showed that he had methamphetamines in his system when he died. And his family right away knew again something was going on here because he wouldn't even take the medication, the pain medication given to him after he had his surgery. He never had any history with drugs at all. He had been tested while in the hospital prior to his surgery. There was nothing in his system then. Again, keep in mind, this is a kid that's heavily involved in sports. I don't know if there was any drug testing involved in that in high school. I don't know if he had to do anything in terms of potentially getting into college. It was not making any sense. Everyone started to come out of the woodworks, friends of his, teammates of his, even his coach from school, all saying that Derontae ending his life was not something anyone ever would have believed is something he would do. No one for a moment thought that this could happen. And obviously, this brought up that other suspicious self-inflicted gunshot wound death that had occurred on the Wade property years prior. So apparently in Halloween of 2014, and there's not a lot of information out there, but I was able to find a little bit, James Wade showed up to Madison County Sheriff's Department, quote, pacing around, waving his arms about. He moved in a jerky motion, moving his head about, his eyes wide open. He stated he wanted to report a missing person, end quote. Now, according to James, when he showed up in this very strange state to Madison County Sheriff's Department, he wanted to report 20-year-old Nick Lowry as missing. Now, Nick Lowry had been dating his daughter, Brooklyn, and she, at the time, I believe, was pregnant with their second child together. They already had one child together. Basically said that he had no idea where Nick Lowry had gone, and so missing person report filed. Well, later on that exact same day, Brooklyn then comes in to the sheriff's department, says that Nick, quote, couldn't take it anymore. He had a gun that his grandfather had left him, and he had only one bullet for the gun. The gun had no clip. Nick said he was going to kill. He took the gun and walked into the woods. Police went to go and search for Nick. And because he was last seen walking out of the Wade home, this is the area that they started on. And the day following, so the day after Nick Lowry was reported as missing, they found him deceased from a gunshot wound in his head on the Wade property. And it was very quickly ruled as a self-inflicted gunshot wound from close range. Now, Nick's father ended up coming to the Madison County Sheriff's Department with concerns. Now, Nick's father came in and said that he spoke to Nick's half-brother, who had concerns of his own, because according to Nick's half-brother, Nick confided in him that James Wade had threatened him multiple times. And so just like in Derontae's case, there are these questions circulating of what could have happened. Is this really self-inflicted? There was clearly tension between these two individuals. And so upon hearing this information, Madison County Sheriff's Department actually did bring James Wade in again to question him, but ultimately decided that, he's telling the truth, he didn't do anything, and so we're not investigating anymore. And so basically, the suspicion over this was dropped. So you would think that this alone, and the fact that there was suspicion as well in this other alleged self-inflicted death on the Wade property, that alone would make you question what happened to Derontae. We're not talking about something that's seemingly cut and dry. You have a black male in the home of a white man that's made multiple racist statements before, has openly said that he does not like black people. There has been another person on his property that has died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound that others say is potentially suspicious, but for some reason at the Madison County Sheriff's Department is like, no, this is definitely self-inflicted. We're just going to move right past it. And what the partygoers said happened that night didn't help them out at all. It actually just added to the speculation. So he ended up at the party at some point that night. No one still knows when exactly. And according to Carrie, one of James Wade's daughters, Derontae spent most of the night with a man named Zachary Graham and another guy named Cody Gideon. Now, I can't say for sure that these are the individuals that were the friends that picked up Derontae. However, Zachary Graham lived at this house according to articles that I have seen. He was spending time with Derontae, and Derontae's mother said that a guy that lived at the house was one of the guys that picked Derontae up. So I feel like all of those dots connect. But anyways, this is who Derontae was mainly spending the night with. Now, according to Zachary Graham, Derontae seemed fine for most of the night. He wasn't acting off or strange or anything. There have been a few rumors that have circulated that before even going to the party, Derontae made it clear he didn't want to go there because he was worried about someone that might potentially show up, someone he was having issues with. But according to Zachary Graham, he was fine until all of a sudden he simply wasn't. Multiple partygoers allegedly claimed that all of a sudden Derontae started acting very scared and very paranoid. And according to what Zachary said, it matches up with the rumors of what Derontae had originally been concerned about. Then Derontae all of a sudden flipped a switch. He began to tell Zachary that he was worried about someone showing up to the house. He was worried that there was someone coming to get him, someone that had a problem with him. Now, according to what James Wade told authorities, he was not even at the home for majority of the night, so he couldn't speak on Derontae's behavior. He claimed that he had been fishing all day and that he had just arrived home from fishing at 2:30 in the morning. He claimed that he had just arrived home and he was on the main floor of the home when he heard the shot ring out, people all scattered, and he eventually made his way to the attic, saw Derontae, and called 911. But all of these people that had been there, even the people that were thought to be Derontae's friends, seemingly left after he allegedly shot himself. So Zachary Graham actually admitted that after this happened, after he saw Derontae shoot himself, that he immediately fled from the house. And there was another individual at the party that had been downstairs with James Wade when all of this was going on, and said that as soon as the shots rang out, quote, "we all left." While his mom did have his phone that had mysteriously been wiped, she was unable to get any of his other belongings. When she reached out to try to get them, she was told that the coroner's office had them, so she reached out to the coroner's office, and the coroner's office said that they gave it to the funeral home, and so she reached out to the funeral home and said that they log everything that comes in and that Derontae did not come in with any of his personal items. So there's just missteps along the entirety of this case so far. And so on May 11th, Derontae's family decided to get a second independent autopsy done. They ended up hiring Dr. Jane Turner, who is a former pathologist from St. Louis, Missouri. And this second autopsy was done, and the findings from the second autopsy were not consistent whatsoever with the findings in the first one. So apparently this autopsy did not at all support this claim from the first autopsy that this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound at a close range. The summary states, quote, "The cause of Mr. Martin's death is gunshot wound of the head. This examination finds no evidence of contact, close or intermediate gunshot entrance wound of the head. Pending review of additional investigative information, including materials from the first autopsy examination, the manner of death is undetermined." She went on to state in an interview, quote, "This entrance wound is what we would call in forensic pathology a distant entrance wound. The end of the gun would have been 2 or 3 feet or more away." So now this information has been released on top of everything else, and keep in mind the sheriff's department is still remaining completely tight-lipped. They're not saying anything. I mean, you can look at all of the different videos that I have linked down below of news coverage on this. They reached out to try to get a statement from the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department wouldn't even call them back. So not only are there issues at this point with 2 completely contradictory autopsy reports, this pathologist that performed the original autopsy started to be put into question as well. Dr. Russell Dedeker was the one that performed Derontae's autopsy, and not just that, he had also apparently performed the autopsy on Nicholas Lowry, and on top of that, he also performed another autopsy that had been put into question around the time that all of this was going on in regards to the death of Michaela Jones. And there is a weird connection here. So in early May 2021, just literally a week or two after Derontae's death, Michaela Jones went missing. I believe she was 19 years old as well. She actually knew Derontae. And her mother said that after Derontae passed away, that she had even been one of the individuals that was like, there's no way, knowing Derontae, he absolutely did not end his own life. Well, she ended up going missing a few weeks later, not necessarily connected at all. She was supposed to go with someone that she, I believe, hadn't even really hung out with before. They were supposed to go somewhere, and their car, I believe, ended up breaking down, and so they were picked up by these 2 men and taken to this rural house. Now, apparently, the next day, she was reported as missing, and I believe the 2 individuals, the 2 males that had been with her, ended up telling Missouri Highway Patrol that she potentially had run off to Texas. And so this was this idea, the statement was made to the public that she could have potentially run off to Texas. However, her family was like, something is not right with this. Even if she did run off to Texas, by some stretch of the imagination, she would be on social media. And she had not logged into anything. There was absolutely no activity. And finally, I guess one of the guys ended up basically confessing that Michaela had actually died. One of the individuals, the males that she had been with that night, said that he slept in the same bed with her, and I guess the next morning he woke up, she was dead. He claimed it was an overdose, and both of the guys apparently then just discarded of her body instead of calling for help, which, by the way, I want to state this just because it's been such a huge topic. There is actually a Good Samaritan law in this area, in the state of Missouri. There's a Good Samaritan law, and had they called for help, even if they were surrounded in drugs, there's paraphernalia everywhere, police would not be able, under the Good Samaritan law, to arrest them or ever charge them with anything in regards to that, because they were trying to seek medical assistance for someone. So just throwing that out there. So ultimately, authorities ended up finding Michaela's body just kind of dumped on the side of a highway in the woods where these guys had just gone and tossed her. And they performed an autopsy and said there was absolutely no sign of foul play. And Dr. Russell Dedeker, again, stated that this was an overdose, that she had died from an overdose. And her family, just like Derontae said, not adding up. She had never done drugs before in her life. Like, something about this seems super strange. And so just like Derontae's family, they ended up getting a second independent autopsy. And I don't know if it was also performed by the same pathologist that used to be in St. Louis, the same one that performed the secondary autopsy for Derontae. I do know that these two mothers, Derontae's mother and Michaela's mother, are like very close now. But all I do know is that this secondary autopsy, just like in Derontae's case, they ended up finding that the manner of death was undetermined. I guess in the original autopsy performed by Dr. Russell Dedeker, there was no blood left in Michaela's body when this autopsy was done. She had been out on the side of the road decomposing for an extended period of time. Dr. Russell Dedeker decided to still try to check for drugs, assumingly to corroborate the claims that this guy that was last with her said. So instead of using blood, which is the accepted way of performing a drug test to determine cause and manner of death, they actually used skeletal muscle. And while you can get results from that, from what has been said from the secondary pathologist, that method is actually not at all supported or validated scientifically or medically. And not just that, the secondary autopsy showed that Michaela had a skull fracture. And she also had like a contusion on her knee. Like, she had injuries on her body that are not at all consistent with an overdose. And it seemed that those were like completely overlooked. And so now Dr. Russell Dedeker is just not looking too great. It's clear that his autopsies are a little bit questionable. And it seems, based on the series of events and what we have in front of us, that it is possible that he basically has taken information given to him and used that to determine the cause of death instead of letting the results from the autopsy determine the cause of death. So by April 27th, with all of this speculation and all of this information just piling on top of itself, the sheriff's department actually did bring in the highway patrol to take a look at the case, to review Derontae's case, which is something that I'm like, thank goodness they at least did that. That was a great move, but ultimately it was determined by late May that the highway patrol ended up agreeing with the conclusions that the sheriff's department had come to. But even with that being said, there were still too many inconsistencies for them to feel comfortable going any further with it. So on July 30th, Madison County prosecutor Dwight Robbins ended up calling for a coroner's inquest into the case to look into the cause and manner of death. Now, this is not something that is incredibly common. From my understanding, this is only done when there's situations like this where a lot of things aren't adding up, and when counties don't have like their own coroner. Ended up pulling a jury panel of 6. I believe they had like 26 or some witnesses that were coming, but essentially this entire presentation during this inquest was basically just information from the sheriff's department, from what the highway patrol found at their own personal investigation and review of the case. Everything was from their investigation. The only thing that was brought forward by Derontae's family was this secondary autopsy that threw a lot of things into question. Pretty much right away, forensic pathologist Dr. Russell Dedeker threw the secondary autopsy under the bus. He said that Dr. Turner from the secondary autopsy had made these determinations, had said there was a lack of soot around the entrance wound, all these different things. There was nothing indicative of a close range shot. However, Dr. Dedeker said that At this point, by the time Dr. Turner received Derontae's body, it had already been embalmed and cleaned. And so a lot of that would already be gone. And so he said because of that, he stood by his original decision, and that was that. Now, Dr. Turner responded, stating that she had not at all been aware that there had already been cleaning and embalming done of the body. Derontae's mother was also upset because she said she never gave permission for that to be done. And Dr. Turner maintained the fact that she believed the manner of death was undetermined. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this, but I feel like while soot can be washed away, there's other evidence that you would see from a very close range shot that would be there. There's like burning that can happen. If the gun's point blank, like close enough, you will even see like bruising. There's a mark there from the barrel of the gun. There's all these things that aren't going to go away with soot. And according to Dr. Turner, those things were not present. He was shot on the left side, so maybe he used his non-dominant hand, but that is again just adding another layer of questionability when it comes to would he have been capable of doing this and would he have done this. Now, I have seen it stated in multiple different interviews and a handful of other coverage on this case that no one knows if there was like GSR tests done on Derontae's hands. No one knows what the gun was, but I was able to actually find an article that seemed to have all of that information. And it's not an article that I would personally believe was, I don't know, like somehow not correct, like had false information. It's dailyjournalonline.com. I mean, everything else perfectly matches up. But this particular article states that Deputy Nicholas Adams testified. This is one of the first deputies that was on the scene. He said that he entered the home and was shown by James Wade where exactly Derontae was. They headed up to the attic. He claims that he had to move several things in order to even get to Derontae's body, which I find strange just because, I mean, if he had crammed himself back somewhere, we're talking about a 6'3", 250-pound guy. And to me, that makes me wonder, like, what was he scared of? Like, he clearly wanted to get to a safe position. Was that just paranoia, or was there actually something going on? But regardless, he said that the gun was an Accutech 380 pistol. And according to him, it was laying just to the left of Derontae's head in a pool of blood with the barrel of the gun facing Derontae. Now, for some unknown reason, he decided to not take pictures of this, not preserve any of this for any sort of investigation. Instead, he just simply picked up the gun and he proceeded to take the gun to his car. Now, he did say that he did this because he was not sure how secure like the scene was in terms of like the other people that were in the house. But still at that point, I would think you just secure that attic area and not move evidence without properly intaking it. I don't know. Anyway, so that is allegedly the gun that was used, but I will say the one thing that is not known and has never been stated is who in the actual heck the gun belongs to. Also stated in this article that a GSR test was in fact done on Derontae's left hand, and it showed lead and barium, which is in fact indicative of at very least, the very least, that he was in the presence of a gun being fired, which, like, no kidding. However, that does not at all prove that he was the one who shot the gun. And I've got absolutely no idea if they fingerprinted the gun, anything like that, if they ever did GSR tests on any of the other people in the house. And we know that lots of the people at the house actually left. And also, interestingly, when it comes to the gun, Cody Gideon, the individual that apparently gave Derontae the gun, was subpoenaed to show up to this and did not show. So that is something that is interesting to note to me. And on top of that, other witnesses were brought forward, two of which made claims that individuals had actually murdered Derontae Martin. So one of the witnesses claimed that 3 individuals, including James Wade, had actually killed Derontae. However, despite calling this person to the stand, which I find odd in itself, they then went on to say, Deputy Adams did, that there was no evidence to support this. I don't know why they would take the time to put someone on the stand knowing that there were like unsubstantiated claims behind it, but I don't know. And then there was also another individual that actually claimed that James Wade confessed to him that he killed Derontae. So this was a man named Philip Lawler, and he took the stand and said that about 2 days or so after Derontae's death, he actually ran into James Wade at a local Walmart. And he was speaking to him. He was speaking to him about what had happened at his house. According to Lawler, James went on and on and on about how he didn't like black people. He was saying multiple racial slurs during all of it. And he said that he did it, allegedly. According to Lawler, James then went on to talk to him about how he needed backup at his house because he was expecting there to be like protests and things. And this person was like, I am not in this. I am not going to be involved. So no, thank you. But despite the fact that this individual came forward and said, look, James Wade confessed to me, ultimately police came back and said that that's not at all the case. This person that had been confessed to actually immediately turned around after hearing this from James Wade and called the sheriff's department to report it. And when the sheriff's department heard this, they ended up bringing in James Wade to question him about it. And according to them, James said that he didn't confess, that instead he said, quote, I probably could have shot him and gotten less heat from this than what I got now from trying to help the guy. So essentially what is going on here is the sheriff's department took James Wade's word that he never actually said that and called the witness on the stand a liar. And that witness has since come forward and said, I'm not going to go out of my way to show up and tell this to people, to immediately call the sheriff's department if that's not actually what I heard. What is interesting that the family has noted is that not a single other witness, not a single other person at the party has corroborated the story that James was not at the house that entire night and that he had just gotten back when this happened, except for James himself. So that's definitely interesting. And his family, who was present at all of this, also stated that a lot of the different people within the party were like all claiming to be doing random things that didn't really make sense at the time that this happened, the shooting happened. Like someone was plunging a toilet, another person was doing dishes, like just kind of really off the wall, random, bizarre things that people wouldn't typically be doing at a party at 3 a.m. Missouri Highway Patrol actually also came and they testified about looking into the case themselves. They still very strongly stood behind the sheriff's department. They also spoke a lot about the space that Derontae was found in. Not just the Missouri Highway Patrol, but also different first responders spoke about this, saying that he was in a very, very tight space. Again, I've seen it described as like a closet within the attic, and that it was so small, they actually had a hard time getting to him and getting him out. And so the idea that someone else could have possibly been in there with him, they just didn't think that that was at all possible. It actually came out that a trooper was the one to administer the polygraph test to James Wade. So not even like a certified polygraph examiner performed the test, like a trooper did. And so that was kind of thrown into question, like how accurate could that be? Polygraph tests are already like as inaccurate and inadmissible in court, by the way. Like, how much do you believe that? So again, it just seems like there was so much weight put on these tests that aren't accurate and like people's word more than anything else. And on top of that, there was another young woman that ended up testifying, and she was like very vocal about what she believed happened and this theory. The woman claimed that she got off work at around 10 p.m. and then she headed to this 18th birthday party. So she was at the party that night. And she's like one of the only party goers, it seems, that believes something is going on here. So she claimed that she was actually in a room in the house with another guy talking when all of a sudden Derontae bursts into the room, looks at the guy she's with and says, quote, "You set me up." And then he completely ran out. After this, all of a sudden, he is dead in the attic. Specifically asked about comments that her brother had made to her in regards to the death of Derontae after it occurred. So she already has a strange thing where he's like, "You set me up." And now her brother apparently comes to her afterwards. And her brother says that he believes that Zachary Graham was actually responsible for Derontae's death and had killed him for snitching on a previous incident. accident. He was the very last one to testify, and this was probably like the biggest thing that was introduced other than the autopsy report, the secondary one, and the entirety of this inquest. And from my understanding, she was essentially shot down right away, and they said there was no evidence at all to prove any of this, and it was just speculation and rumor. Well, I decided to kind of look into this information just to see where would this have come from. Now, I was in fact able to find that there was a shooting that occurred in February prior to this. And this shooting was by a young man, a 19-year-old named Adam Rulo. Adam Rulo also went to Central High School and was on the wrestling team. From what Derontae's mother has stated, this was actually Derontae's friend that was getting out of jail. This was who Derontae was supposed to be going to see that weekend, is Adam Rulo, the guy involved in a shooting. According to Derontae's grandmother, essentially someone had falsely accused Derontae of basically giving the investigating officers a report about the shooting involving Adam Rulo. But Derontae had never actually given any statement to police. So I don't know how likely it is that this Adam guy believed that one of his friends snitched on him, or if someone else believed that Derontae snitched and took things into their own hands. But when you take that information paired with how multiple people throughout that night claimed that Derontae was worried about someone specifically coming to the party, after hearing all of this information, 11:15 p.m. that day, they ended the evidence portion of the inquest, and the jury basically was supposed to go and deliberate and come back with their conclusion. And shockingly, it only took 2 hours. And in those 2 hours, they concluded that Derontae Martin did not die from self-inflicted gunshot wound, that he died due to violence.
Family suspicion was right all along. Their loved one did not die by suicide. That initial cause of death by the Madison County Sheriff's Office was overturned after an inquest this morning. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michelle Lee.
And I'm Casey Nolan. The case of Derontae Martin has left the family furious with the local sheriff's office. They tell the I-Team's Christine Byers they finally have hope that the suspect will now be caught.
It took a jury of 6 about 2 hours to determine Derontae Martin's death was no suicide.
I feel rejoiced. I am so glad. I am happy that they seen through all their lies and they sought the truth that my baby did not kill herself.
The prosecutor, coroner, and investigators involved in this proceeding wouldn't go on camera, but the Madison County prosecutor told the I-Team he asks for coroner's inquests when there are questions about how someone died. It's a proceeding that happens in counties that don't have medical examiners. There's no question Derontae Martin died from a gunshot wound to his left temple, but the jurors in this case, which included 1 black man, 1 white man, and 4 white women, had to determine today how it happened. Was it by suicide? Was it by accident? Was it natural causes? Or by violence? A total of 26 witnesses were called, including James Wade, who owns the home where the shooting happened. Derontae was there for Wade's daughter's 18th birthday party. Jurors also heard from paramedics, highway patrol investigators, and Madison County deputies. Troopers and the county's pathologist said they believed it was a suicide.
Justice for Derontae Martin!
As a handful of people gathered with Derontae's mother and grandmother outside the courthouse, they still believe Derontae's death may have been racially motivated.
We don't have the answers to who did it. We don't have the answers to why they did it. But one thing for sure and 2 things for certain, God ain't through yet.
The verdict means the investigation is not over. With enough evidence, prosecutors could still charge someone in Derontae's death.
I think it's a start, but there's a lot further we have to go with this. We got to figure out what really happened, why it happened.
In Fredericktown for the I-Team, Christine Byers, 5 on your side.
Despite the jury's decision, investigators say the homeowner where the shooting happened passed a polygraph. He testified he didn't know who shot Martin. They also still believe Martin died of a gunshot wound, and a forensic pathologist agreed.
We do not have all of the evidence and all of the information, but the jury of 6 got to see everything that police had collected. They got to hear from the witnesses. They got to hear recording, interrogations and questioning that occurred at the beginning of this case. And all of that information that we do not have, that even his family does not have, that to them led to a completely different conclusion than what the Sheriff's Department and Missouri Highway Patrol had come to. But unfortunately, this seemed to lead absolutely nowhere. Now, one thing that I found very interesting when I was initially looking into this is that the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Robbins, I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness there's someone that has like come forward and is pushing to have an inquest done into this. Like, we're going to go somewhere. And so I assumed that after this occurred, he would push further to keep things rolling and, something. But apparently he has like since then refused to make any statements. Like, once they gave this verdict, he shut his briefcase and he left and wouldn't speak to anybody. And so a lot of people are doubtful about what the intentions were with this inquest. And I do know that Derontae's grandmother and mother have spoken about their feelings on this. The conclusion that has essentially come from this is that basically the Sheriff's Department and the Highway Patrol and all of them were tired of being questioned on the conclusion that they came to. And so they genuinely felt that they'd be able to do this inquest, lay out all of their evidence, try to disprove the secondary autopsy, and that basically with a jury in charge of it saying, no, this is definitely self-inflicted, that they would be able to basically lay this to rest and get everyone to stop talking about it. But it did not at all go the way that they thought it would go. And so everyone basically at that point was like, oh crap. And from that point on, nobody is saying a thing. Like, you thought they weren't talking before, they're definitely not talking now. When this happened, I believe the Sheriff's Department turned the case over entirely to Missouri Highway State Patrol. And what's strange about this is that to this day, no one has any idea what is happening in this case. There's been no arrest, there's been no movement, there's been no press releases, there's been no conversations with the family. Derontae's family said that it was with the Highway Patrol, but when they called to try to ask about, information, updates, I guess the Highway Patrol said, no, the FBI has the case now. But when his family called the FBI, they apparently said that they didn't have the case. They at the very least said they couldn't confirm one way or another, but if they did, it would have to be like on a federal level. And so even the family is not able to get a straight answer as to who was supposed to be investigating it. And then from a most recent interview that was done 4 months ago with Derontae's mother, Erica, the case apparently was like very quietly closed actually, and just like kicked to the side. I've never, ever before seen a jury convene and overturn like a cause of death or manner of death or overturn anything and the investigating agency completely disregard that and stick with what they originally determined. I've never, ever seen anything like that before. And if you have, let me know down below because I want to see like how it played out. But according to the family, they have no clue what's going on with this case. And so they ended up calling in help. On April 25th, 2022, after a year of absolutely no answers or investigating being done, Campaign Zero ended up launching a campaign called #JusticeForDerontae. And they're basically demanding that an independent investigation be done. They want this case completely taken out of the hands of Missouri and given to the DOJ, FBI, just someone to look into all of these different inconsistencies to hopefully actually investigate as a whole so that an arrest can be made. Because again, remember, they determined he died by violence, that this is not self-inflicted. So they are really the ones behind the movement right now to get some sort of answers. And so that's been their push for the past couple of months. And I'm hoping that this will help continue to push things forward, continuing to talk about this story. So they have two very specific calls to action, which I will have up here on the screen as well as down below. The first one is to basically call the DOJ Civil Rights Division and demand an independent investigation into it. And then the second one is to report Derontae's death as a hate crime to the FBI, because there is a massive potential that that is what it is. They want these two branches to be very well aware of Derontae's death so that maybe they will jump into action. Now, they have an entire website up for Derontae that outlines a lot of this information. They've collected a lot of evidence, including all of those bigoted memes that were posted by James Wade. They're all there collected. The text message where he denies even being at the house. They have a lot there. They've got different documents documents saved there. So if you are interested in looking at any of that, I obviously have that link down below. They basically put structure behind this push for answers. And so they've created this 10 questions that they want answered by the investigating agencies, questions that should have been answered from the get-go. So question number 1 is, why didn't the sheriff's office call Derontae's family to notify them of his death? And this one, I completely understand why they're asking it and why it's number 1, because that is the number 1 thing that they should have done immediately. And the fact that they didn't is just something that I don't think I'm ever going to understand. This day, according to Derontae's family, the sheriff's department has not personally reached out to them a single time. So it's not just they didn't notify them of his death, like they did nothing to reach out to the family, to express their condolences, to even apologize for not telling them about their son's death. What's interesting is that the sheriff's department actually has been under the microscope for a very long time, because there are lots of cases where there's problems like this. There's lots of families that have missing loved ones or certain things happening within that particular county or that community where they feel the sheriff's department is not doing a thing. So when Derontae's case happened and all these different things came to light and people started connecting the dots, they started asking the sheriff's department about it. And the sheriff's department took absolutely zero accountability or responsibility for their actions. And instead, Sheriff Katie McCutcheon snapped back and basically said that vloggers online and what else did she say? Facebook warriors were bashing her department, and essentially they ended up deleting their Facebook page because they didn't want to be bashed anymore. And the thing is we'll never fully understand, not being in law enforcement, what it is like to be in law enforcement and the frustration that comes with it, and having these families, wanting you to do more when you maybe sometimes cannot do anymore, that you're doing all you can do. But then there's situations like this where you can't even call a family to tell them that their son is dead, and then from then on, when they finally reach out to you, you respond with hostility. Something like that is not acceptable. And when you are called out for that, take accountability for it, learn from it, grow from it, do something. Don't get mad that other people are calling you out and then delete your entire Facebook profile, which I'm not even sure is legal. I'm pretty sure that like public entities, like big corporations and like government agencies and all that, they're not even legally allowed to delete like comments, let alone delete their entire pages. So that's just an interesting note. But regardless, I understand why the family has these questions, because this isn't just a situation where the family's just not happy that things are happening fast enough because they're not being told things. There's literally not even the most basic proper protocol being followed on this case. Number 2, how did Derontae end up in James Wade's attic, which is another big question, because that was a very random place for him to be. And he had never been to this house before. How did he know where the attic was? Like, why would he have decided to seek out the attic? Number 3, who owned the gun used to take Derontae's life? Again, I am pretty sure that investigators probably know the answer to that question. I will say they're probably not telling anyone for that individual's safety, because at this point in time, no one has been accused of anything. Like, there is no person of interest, no suspect, none of that. So I'm sure that is why they're not giving that information. Number 4, why were there so many different reports of what happened that night from the party goers? Unfortunately, I just don't have enough of the information to know all the inconsistencies that were there, but that is another great question. Number 5, methamphetamine was found in Derontae's system despite no prior history of drug use. Was James Wade's home searched for drugs? Number 6, why are young people at James Wade's house ending up dead? Number 7 kind of goes hand in hand with number 5. Did the sheriff's office treat Wade's home as a crime scene, knowing it had been the site of another alleged self-inflicted death a few years prior? Again, it doesn't sound like they did, just because they weren't there for very long. And according to family, actually, and I cannot confirm this, again, this is one of the rumors that circulated, and this is what the family has claimed. I have not seen physical evidence of this. Some of the partygoers that remained at the house actually posted Derontae's body onto Snapchat that night. And there are allegedly other Snapchats that they posted showing them cleaning up some of the crime scene. And from my understanding, again, from what family has stated, the police, I guess, released the house back to James Wade immediately afterwards and told them they were allowed to clean everything up. So interesting. Number 8, why was Derontae's phone missing data when law enforcement finally returned it to his family? Now, that is specifically coming from the Campaign Zero website. However, that's the only place I've seen it mentioned that they got the phone back from law enforcement. Specifically coming from Derontae's family, I have heard them state that the phone was given back by the friends he had gone with, and that's when it showed up completely wiped clean. But again, another big question, was he texting someone asking for help that night? Was he saying, hey, was there proof within that he was worried about this mystery particular person? Was that person's name in there? Were there pictures or videos that had been taken? Like, who did someone not want someone to know about? That to me is very clear evidence of trying to very quickly hide something. And I really genuinely hope that his family has tried to find some sort of expert to retrieve all of that information from his phone. If not, I highly, highly suggest them find help to get that done as soon as humanly possible. Number 9, why was James Wade's polygraph administered to him by a highway patrol trooper instead of a certified polygraph examiner? Again, we know how I feel about that. Polygraph tests are not admissible in court, and they are basically just tools to kind of fork the path, so to speak, and like, do we go this way or this way after this? They are not reliable tests whatsoever, especially when you don't have someone qualified or certified performing them. So I definitely do think that's another great question. And number 10, why is the Missouri Highway Patrol seemingly ignoring the jury's 2021 ruling that Derontae died by violence? So these are all the very obvious questions that I'm sure all of you guys already have, but for some reason have not been answered. And while a lot of people seem to very heavily be focusing on James Wade, I personally think that may only have to do with his, racist posts onto social media. Obviously, we do have the individuals that have come forward saying that he confessed or that he was involved with 2 other people. But I really am curious about the people at the party that night, the other young adults that he was partying with. You've got these people that he apparently was saying, you set me up. Was he taken to that party as part of this retaliation to get back at him for being thought to be a snitch? Was it possibly a let's let him dig his own grave situation where he was unknowingly given drugs and then handed a gun and they're like, let him take care of himself? Why was he in the attic? Was he chased there by someone? Was he scared and hiding? There's just so many questions. And then the guy that apparently gave him this gun, how come he didn't show up when he was subpoenaed there? Did he actually give him the gun, or was the gun placed there after someone did something to him?
Stacy Jones and Erica Lotz are 2 mothers united in grief.
She knows the pain of losing a child.
When I don't have anybody to talk to, Stacy always answers.
They're also united in questions, each of them over the loss of a child.
Well, why would you give somebody who's paranoid, under the influence, a gun?
Why are they not investigating? Why are they not doing more?
They're not investigating because they have exhausted all their leads.
While dealing with the loss, the 2 women found each other online and immediately bonded. Now, as they search and push for answers, they're each using a mother's pain to find justice for their children.
And none of this will bring them back, but we just want to know the truth of what happened to them and whoever took them from us to get justice for them.
They may not be here, but they need answers themselves.
There are just a lot of questions, and it just kind of continues because right before the inquest happened, I'm trying to find the exact date, April 14th, 2022, James Wade was actually arrested and held in custody for an unrelated shooting. So I decided to look into this just because while it is unrelated, and that's all it's described as when you look at it online, I just wanted to kind of get an idea, and it, interestingly enough, involves people that had been at the party that night. There's just a lot more to the story that I think none of us are aware of, none of us know. It's just not being shared, and I think there are a good handful of people that may have information in this case that they're just not willing to bring forward for one reason or another. Whether it's to protect a friend, clearly based on rumors, there are very strong feelings when it comes to snitching, so there could be people out there scared to rat out a friend for something that they may have done. There's so much going on here.
And when the biggest, brightest smile, just a smile that would just warm you up.
Do what you
You all right?
Memories of her grandson quickly bring tears.
It hurts my heart to know that somebody hurt my grandson.
Derontae was found dead in this Fredericktown home last month. In the weeks that followed, social media swirled with theories and accusations that the homeowner, James Wade, had something to do with it or knew more than he was letting on.
I know I didn't do it, and I tried to help him, but nobody's talking about that. You know, they're just making up all this other stuff. I mean, they got me being everything from a racist serial killer to a big-time meth dealer, and, you know, I'm neither.
Wade said he got home from a day of fishing about 30 minutes before he heard the shot.
And I was downstairs, and he just shot himself, and I called 911 to try to help him.
I believe this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
There are no findings on my examination of a contact gunshot wound.
Derontae's family hired forensic pathologist Dr. Jane Turner to perform a second autopsy. After years with the St. Louis Medical Examiner's Office, she's now in private practice.
The contact gunshot wound, you'll see an outline of the muzzle of the gun, an imprint of the muzzle of the gun on the skin. I didn't see those. The end of the gun would have been 2 or 3 feet or more away. This entrance wound is what would be called in forensic pathology as a distant entrance wound.
It's the only answers Derontae's mother has been given since his death.
I can't stop crying, so I try not to cry. So, and then like I tell myself, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry.
And if this was you and this was your kid,
Then we wouldn't be having this discussion, because it wouldn't be a race thing.
can you understand the family's position in this?
I can understand how they feel. I'd be angry too if I was hearing 25 stories. I'm just not involved in it, and I wish the cops would hurry up and make that clear to people.
And as they lay Derontae to rest, his family and friends have so many questions and so few answers.
The true meaning of a friend, he was that to many. Somebody was not a friend to him.
We tried to speak with the teenagers who were there the night Derontae died. So far, none of them have gotten back to us. To learn more about Dr. Turner's autopsy findings, visit this story at ksdk.com. For the I-Team, Christine Byers, 5 on your side.
Things, and when you have on top of that very clear issues within the investigating agencies when it comes to their ability to investigate, their clear lack of willingness to investigate certain things, it makes everything that much more complicated. And I could honestly do probably like a whole month's worth of cases from this area. There are so many that are similar to this. In a sense of there are unsolved cases where the families are having to bend over backwards to try to get anyone to look into it and do something about it. And all of these families are now having to kind of get together to take turns fighting this monster to try to get their loved one's death investigated. And that's just absolutely wild to me. And the fact that there's so many in this small area should definitely be a red flag to somebody. And this idea that this happy 19-year-old decided to go to a house he didn't know about 100 miles away from home to then all of a sudden take drugs for the first time, find this person's attic, and chose in that moment in a completely strange, uncomfortable place to end his life, it doesn't sit well, and it doesn't sit well for a reason. And meth can do crazy things, drugs can do crazy things, and we don't know what state of mind he may have been in with that meth that was in his system. But at the very least, there should have been an investigation to just ensure that that was the cause of death. There should have been someone that was like, hey, why on earth did someone give a paranoid drugged man a gun? So many people lost a friend, lost a light, lost a son, lost a brother, lost a grandson, and he had so many plans for his future, so many things that he was working hard to accomplish. And to see that so quickly that can be taken from someone is honestly very scary. It's a scary reality. Derontae deserved a lot more. He deserved someone to take the time on his case. His family deserves to have all of these answers. They deserve to be treated with respect attacked and they were not. My heart breaks for them, and I hope that they eventually get the answers that they deserve and some sort of peace in all of this. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Derontae's story. I definitely encourage you guys to go and check out Campaign Zero and see kind of what they're doing and all of their different campaigns that they're running. They're all very important cases and issues that need to be spotlighted. And again, if you have the ability, check out the different call to actions I have listed down below directly from Campaign Zero. Make a call, send an email, help put his case in a spotlight so that something is hopefully done. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Howland fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.